Recently I got the chance to travel part of the Canadian and also American West Coast. The trip was super beautiful, but before actually flying out, I was super confused at all of the options for getting data on my phone. I was only traveling for 2 weeks, but in spite of that, I tested out a bunch of different eSIM options for North America, just so you don't have to. This was all to figure out what is the cheapest but also best option to get quick eSIM data in North America. Stick around to see what I found out. So why exactly did I buy an eSIM? When traveling nowadays, you obviously need some kind of data on your phone, and there's many different options. For one, you could contact your local provider at home to get some kind of roaming plan with them. If you're only traveling to one country and don't want to rely on roaming, it oftentimes makes sense to go to a well-known carrier in the country you're traveling to. There you can get a physical SIM or even eSIM for the duration of your stay, and these are often more bang for your buck. And then, this is what I opted for, there's these new modern companies that offer eSIM connections all across the world. Now you always have to check if your device supports eSIM, but if it does, eSIMs are super cool. As opposed to sticking a physical SIM in your phone, eSIMs you can essentially, after buying, just download and activate. So anyways, there I was before the trip, going through all of the different options. The eSIM space is super competitive, and like with VPN providers, some companies tend to market very aggressively. If you've watched a lot of YouTube over the last few years, you definitely know what I mean. With all that marketing going on, it's hard to tell what eSIM service is actually good. They all seem pretty much the same. I dug through all the information I could find out and settled on the 6 seemingly best options I wanted to try out in North America. To compare these 6 options as objectively as possible, I tried to book a plan with 1 GB of data for each of them. The duration of these plans varied slightly between providers.
With that, let's move on to the eSIMs.
Let's start with Saily, one of the eSIM providers you might have already heard of. For 1 GB of data and a duration of 7 days, Saily charges $5.99. As part of a small background check, I found out that Saily basically resells their eSIM services from a company called One Global. Apparently there's definitely a few eSIM providers that function this way. They use One Global in the background, but then market it differently to consumers. Not necessarily a turnoff, but take that for what it's worth. The app looks really cool and it's really easy to navigate through. The sign-up process also was relatively smooth. What I do want to say though is throughout the sign-up process, Saily automatically checks receive marketing emails without your consent, so you have to actively uncheck that. This was the first eSIM I connected to, and from what I could tell, the speed and the reception was good. Also, all the carriers that I connected to I knew by name, so that's cool too. Now here's a big bonus for Saily. A lot of cheap eSIM providers route their traffic through Eastern Europe or some part of Asia. I know this from using eSIMs in the past, and then you get these weird localization issues, ads in Polish or some other stuff like that. What I have to say with Saily is that there was no weird localization. When I googled, everything was in English and I got North American ads. This is something you might not actively notice, but for me this definitely made the experience feel a bit more premium. After that, I went on to try mobimatter. Mobimatter itself is just a platform that aggregates different eSIM deals. The quality of the eSIM service you'll get really depends on which SIM you choose on mobimatter. I had heard a lot of good things about these Sparks eSIMs, so that's what I opted for. A Sparks eSIM on mobimatter with 1 GB of data and a duration of 14 days cost me $4.99. So $1 cheaper and 7 days longer than Saily. Here I ran into the Polish localization that I was talking about. When I googled, all the results were in Polish and I got Polish ads. I don't have any objective stats to support this unfortunately, but the network speed and the latency on this specific eSIM felt a bit slower than compared to the others. And this was despite good reception. What also didn't really work for me is seeing the live usage data of the SIM in the app. This just meant that I had to use my device settings to monitor my data usage. Depending on the plan, of course, the eSIMs seem to use very good and well-known carriers. This was also true for my Sparks eSIM, which in the US, for example, mainly used AT&T. One thing I really liked in using mobimatter is you don't actually have to sign up to buy an eSIM. You only need an email. So that's pretty cool. And then we move on to airalo. The North America plan on airalo automatically includes Mexico and cost me $6.50 for 7 days of usage and 1 GB. The app just feels a bit older, but that's totally fine. It's still reliable and has everything you need. One thing I have to say is that during the checkout process, airalo is very aggressive at hinting that you should refer other people to this app. At least in the US, this was the first time that I was connected to T-Mobile. Big bonus, there was no localization. So again, I was served American ads and all the search results were in English. What's also totally unique to airalo as compared to all of the other options I tested is you don't have to turn on roaming. So the eSIM is actually registered in North America, not some random country like Poland or Singapore. Again, this doesn't have any super crazy effect on the actual usage of the eSIM, but to me, that definitely screams quality. Now, going from the most expensive 1 GB plan, airalo, to the cheapest, we're gonna check out microesim. Microesim, the provider, I think is located in Hong Kong, as many of these cheap providers are. I found microesim on eSIMDB, eSIM database. It's a really cool tool to compare different eSIM plans. Some of the very cheap options you do find on eSIMDB are a bit sketchy. I settled on using microesim because I'd heard them mentioned on Reddit. Since microesim is so cheap, they really focus on the basics. For example, there's no app available. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but the tracking of your data usage is a bit harder and just not as pretty to look at. To be fair, there is a part of their website where you can enter your very long SIM number and then track your usage statistics that way. Again, here the traffic was routed through Poland apparently because I got a lot of Polish ads and stuff, but I wasn't expecting anything else. What I do have to say, what's pretty cool is you have a bunch of different options. For example, for North America, you can choose between having a certain amount of data per day or in total, and then the price adjusts accordingly. The whole process with microesim is very, very basic. It's definitely not as flashy as all the other providers I tested. It really seems like they focus on the essential. It's very, very basic, but it works, and I appreciate their approach. What you see is what you get. Onto jetpac, which is definitely more flashy than microesim. Here, the 1 GB plan was for a duration of 4 days, and because of a special offer only cost me $2. I think without the special offer, this pack costs $5. Jetpac definitely does have an app, but you have to log in to browse it. What I did not like is that the Jetpac app is the only app out of the apps that I tested that requests location access. In general, it just seems a bit poorly optimized, a bit cobbled together, not very like iOS native. This was also the first time I actually had to enter my credit card information instead of using Apple Pay. The activation time of the eSIM when it connects to the network and does all the configuration also took way longer than the other eSIMs I had tested before. There was no weird localization though, which is cool. Apparently, based on my research, they route their traffic through either Paris or Amsterdam. Other than that, the actual service was fine. Nothing good or bad. The reception was fine and also the speeds were fine. The last eSIM I tested was with Firsty. Firsty has a bit of a more unique approach to offering eSIMs. They only do unlimited plans. They actually have an ad-supported free tier, which is pretty cool, so you don't actually have to pay anything. But I think you have to watch ads every hour, so I don't know if that's worth it. Here, 7 days of apparently unlimited internet access costs $10.50. The setup process of the eSIM seems a bit more complicated. There's definitely 1 or 2 more steps you have to do as compared to the other eSIMs I tested. But there's some really helpful video guides in the app that I didn't see any other app do, so that's cool. The activation time again took several minutes, which is definitely more than some of the other options I tried. Something that's very not cool about my experience with Firsty is that it just did not work in the US. I double checked and made sure that I had bought US and Canada, but for some reason it just would not give me data in the USA. Once in Canada, it worked fine, but if I buy a plan that's USA and Canada, I definitely expect the eSIM to work in the USA as well. I was only in the US with this eSIM for a couple of hours, so maybe it just needed some extra time, but it's still weird. Apart from that, I liked the design and vibe of the app. It seemed very distinct from the other options and just fresh. Alright, there we have it. Those are the 6 eSIM options that I tried out in North America. Now, what would I recommend? If you don't mind paying a bit extra and just want a stable and fast connection, I would go with airalo. They're a company that has been around a bit longer than all of the other providers that I tested, and with them it just seems to work, even if it is a bit pricier. For the 1 week 1 GB plan that I tested here, their price isn't even that much more expensive than the runner-up saily at $6. Here I would definitely pick airalo over saily. If you're looking into longer durations and more data, you might have to compare the plans in more detail. I think with more volume, airalo also gets a bit more expensive, so you'd have to decide if the more premium service is worth it for you. Now, if you're just looking for the cheapest possible option that works, I would go with microesim. They have so many different options globally, and my experience with them was pretty good. They don't market as much, they're not as flashy as some of these other options, but when it comes down to it, the actual eSIM itself isn't much different, but it is cheaper. Yes, microesim routes their traffic seemingly through Poland, but so do a bunch of these other companies that have a much more shiny UI. So essentially, either pay a premium for a brand that's well known like Airalo, or just go with the cheapest option. I hope I could help you decide in some way at least. Safe travels and happy surfing.